Welcome my allies from all around to a Minecraft Bedrock Command Block tutorial. This is Frontline, and in this video we will be discussing time machines, also known as time farms. This is a concept I have created in which you can extend or shorten the days in the game with ease. I will warn you that there is a bit of math involved with this one, but don't worry, it isn't too complex. It mostly consists of plugging numbers into a formula once everything is said and done. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with the basics. Minecraft runs on a tick-based system. A game tick is 1/20th of a second, or 0.05 seconds in decimal format. There are also time ticks, which make the day go forward at a steady rate. Every game tick, a time tick is added to the game clock when daylight cycle is on. This means that a time tick is the same length as a game tick. The day cycle lasts for 24,000 of these game ticks, making the day last for 20 minutes. What we're going to do is artificially alter this clock through the use of command blocks. Use the command give@self command block to get yourself one of these bad boys. In this case, since we're using repeating command blocks, you can also type give@self repeating command block, but this does require some extra typing, and if you do end up giving yourself the standard type, all you need to do is change its mode from impulse here to repeat. And then you get yourself what we need. If you want this command block to work wherever you are in the world, you're going to need to use ticking areas. More information about those can be found in the description below. Due to a new update, there is now an option to set a delay for your command block to activate. This comes in super useful when creating time farms, as it creates a wide range of possibilities for our day lengths. Before we start though, it is worth knowing that the delay of 0 has the same functionality as a delay of 1. As you can see, once I go ahead and activate both of these at the same time, it's going to go ahead and have 0, 1 spread out equally. This is because every game tick the command block activates, meaning that a delay of 0 in reality is impossible, and a delay of 1 is actually what's happening whenever you put a delay of 0. You can see that if we go into our 1 tick delay block here and decide to change our delay here to 2 instead, then we go ahead and see that there is a difference in which instead of having it be able to be only like one in the other alternating, as you can see at the top there, it's 1, 0, 0, then 1 again, because the 1 is being delayed for a more significant amount of time. All of our time farms will use the same basic command, but we're going to change the input values as we create different designs. In any time farm, type in the command /time add. After these keywords, the game is expecting us to input an integer value to add to the time, which I'm going to be calling our increment value from this point on. This increment value can either be positive or negative in case we want to go forward or backward in time. We'll see why this is useful later. But for this first example, let's say we want to add 8 to the time every cycle and run our command block every 5 ticks. How long will this time farm make the day last for? For now, we are going to assume that the daylight cycle is off so that no time ticks are being added naturally to the game clock between activations of our command. This means that the amount of time a day lasts for should equal the amount of times our command block activates per day multiplied by the time it takes for the command block to run each cycle. The amount of times our command block activates is 24,000 divided by our increment value, which we will call I sub 0. The time it takes for the command block to run is 0.05 times our delay value, which we will call D. If you recall earlier, this is because a game tick is 0.05 seconds, and we want to convert the values found from this equation to real time. When we simplify the equation, we find that time equals 1200 times our delay divided by the increment value. When we plug in the values from our example, we get that if we run the command block every 5 ticks, adding 8 to the clock every time it runs, the day will last for 750 seconds, or 12 minutes and 30 seconds. In many cases, however, it is better to have the daylight cycle on to provide smoother movement of the sun in the sky, so we must see if doing this would help us in this scenario. Let's go back to our time equation. The increment value of the day will no longer be accurate now that the sun is moving on its own, so we need to find ourselves a new denominator. We have already discussed that a time tick is the same duration as a game tick when the daylight cycle is on. This means that the amount of time ticks that pass in between each run of the command block is exactly the same amount of game ticks the command block is being delayed for. Because of this, we can set the denominator to the delay plus I sub 1. I am using a different variable for the increment value since this will help us in equating the two models later. If you ever struggle to see why one is called I sub 0 and one is called I sub 1, think of it as though it's a binary model. When the daylight cycle is off, that corresponds to the binary value of 0. When the daylight cycle is on, that corresponds to the binary value of 1. The two equations we have share some common variables, forming a system of equations. The easiest way to equate these is via the time variable, and the result of this is shown here. We can then take the inverse of both sides, cancel the common divisors, and isolate our desired variable to get our solution. I sub 1 equals I sub 0 minus the delay. This means that when the daylight cycle is on, our increment value should be 3. So which solution is better? Daylight cycle on or daylight cycle off? This all comes down to which increment value is closest to 0. This is because we want the movement of the sun to be as small as possible each time the command activates. We don't want the sun to jump around excessively, as this would ruin the illusion that it's naturally gliding across the sky as it would have done if we did nothing to the daylight cycle. On screen now, I'm going to show both solutions to our 12-minute and 30-second day. The one with daylight cycle on goes across the screen much more smoothly, and the jumps are much less noticeable. On the other hand, the one with daylight cycle off jumps a whopping 8 time ticks ahead each time the command block activates, making it much more noticeable. If you complete this process for many different time farm setups, you'll notice that daylight cycle should always be enabled for day lengths below 40 minutes, and that daylight cycle should always be disabled for day lengths above 40 minutes. It makes sense that you would want to keep daylight cycle on for values less than 20 minutes, especially since you have seen this happen with our example. For that one, we were merely adding time to make what would be normally a longer day shorter. However, you may be uncertain as to if the 20 to 40 minute time range will also always be better with daylight cycle on. This is where adding negative time to the day comes into play. Because you only need to add a small amount of negative time to make that day a tiny bit longer, it is still beneficial to turn daylight cycle on when in this time range. We will use a 30-minute time farm as an example. It has a delay of 3 and an increment value of 2. You can see for yourself though when we plug these values into our equation earlier that we do get 30 minutes. Now when we calculate this time farm's daylight cycle on equivalent, we get an increment value of -1. Now there isn't much difference between an increment value of 3 and -1, but the daylight cycle on method does move the sun backward a much less noticeable amount than what we would have if the daylight cycle is off, as you can kinda see on screen now. Okay, so we've covered time farms less than 40 minutes and why they are always better with daylight cycle on. What happens when we build a 40-minute time farm? The value of I sub 0 was always closer to 0 so far, but the closer the time gets to 40 minutes, the more similar I sub 0 and I sub 1's distances from 0 become. Once we reach 40 minutes exactly, the distance between 0 and our increment values are exactly the same. Here we have a daylight cycle off time farm with a delay of 2 and an increment value of 1. Its daylight cycle on equivalent has a delay of 2 and an increment value of -1. At this point, it's more personal preference as to which solution is better, as both are not very noticeable changes in sun movement. However, when we go above 40 minutes, we become too far from the standard 20-minute day length for it to assist us well, and thus we should turn off daylight cycle entirely. As an example, here is a 50-minute time farm. It has a delay of 5 and an increment of 2 given the daylight cycle is off. When we solve for I sub 1, we find that it equates to -3. However, 2 is closer to 0 than -3, meaning that the solution for daylight cycle being off is the better one, even if it's by a little. So that's the basics. That's how you calculate the duration of an already existing time farm, and how to determine whether or not daylight cycle should be enabled when you are running it. However, you may be wondering how to find out how to build a time farm for a specific time you have in mind, without all the trial and error associated with finding the right delay value and the right increment value. For this, I have created a streamlined process that minimizes the trial and error associated with building a time farm. For this example, let's say we want to create a time farm that makes the day last for 24 minutes. Let's convert this value from minutes to seconds and get that there should be 1440 seconds in our day. Since our equation when daylight cycle is off is easier to manipulate, we're going to start with that one. I'm going to do some simple multiplication and division to move our variables around so that our delay variable is isolated on one side. For whatever time you want to make your time farm last for, insert that value into this equation. For our example, we are going to substitute 1440 seconds for our time variable, leaving us with I sub 0 as our input and d as our output. But now we run into a problem. What do we input into I sub 0 to allow us to get our desired delay? Let's step back a little bit. A day lasts for 24,000 ticks. We want our increment value to be a factor of 24,000 so that our day begins exactly where it ends. If we increment our day by 7 each time the command block runs, which by the way is not a factor of 24,000, we get that the command block would have to run 3,428.5714 yada 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 times. This means that our day will not end exactly where it started and that it will be off by a few ticks. On the other hand, 8 is a factor of 24,000 since we can evenly multiply 8 times 3,000 to get 24,000. What this means is that if we increment by 8, our clock would need to run 3,000 times to get to the same point in the day by which it started. 24,000 is a very versatile number and has 54 factors. We will also consider the pair of 1 and 24,000 in our calculations, even if they are often disregarded as factors in some other cases. We want our increment value to be as small as possible, so whenever we are determining what value it should be, we will start at 1 and work our way up the list until we reach a value which satisfies our equation. So what does that mean? Let's go back to our example. When we input 1 as our increment value, we get a delay of 6/5 of a tick. It is not possible to delay by this amount as the command block only accepts integer values. Going down our list, we will now try to input 2 as our increment value, getting a delay of 12/5 of a tick. Still not an integer. Eventually, we get to the increment value of 5, which gives us a delay of 6. Since we know that 24 minutes is less than 40 minutes, daylight cycle should be on. We will thus continue our process and figure out the increment value we should implement, I sub 1. Using the equation found earlier, our I sub 1 value equates to -1. On screen now, you can see that it still holds true that daylight cycle should be on for this day length. Both systems will create a day length of 24 minutes, but it is better to create a system in which the average player will not notice the difference in the sky. You may be thinking that this is way too long of a process to follow. However, that is only because I wanted you to understand how it is that I came up with these equations. Once you understand how they work, it is insanely easy to create time farms of all kinds of durations. Let's quickly get ourselves a time farm for a 6-hour and 15-minute day, which would otherwise take a really long time to get by trial and error. Let's plug in an increment value of 1 into our equation, getting a value of 75/4. 2 will give us 75/2. 3 will give us 225/4, but 4 will give us the answer we're after, 75. This means that every 75 ticks of delay, we must add the value of 4 to the time. Since this is significantly longer than the standard 20-minute day, I can guarantee you turning daylight cycle on will not make the sun go through the sky smoother, but for those who may be skeptical, I'm going to show why anyway. Through our equation to find I sub 1, we find that it equates to -71, which is much further from 0 than our I sub 0 value of 4. And now we have ourselves a working time farm, and it didn't even take that long to calculate. But now I'm going to show you a shortcut that will help you create all kinds of time farms without going through an entire list of factors. So let's do another example, but this time make it a really absurd time, like 32 minutes and 15 seconds. We first plug in the increment value of 1 into our equation. From this, we get a delay of 129/80. For the shortcut to work, We will need a calculator like mine that would give us this fractional value as opposed to a decimal one. There are some online as well if you need them. Instead of going through our list one by one, input the denominator as our increment value. This will give us a delay of 129 ticks and save us from having to go through an additional 21 factors from our list. Since our desired time is less than 40 minutes, we will want to calculate what our I sub 1 value should be. Using our equation, we get that I sub 1 equates to negative 49. Let's see the two models side by side now. As you can see, neither method is really all that smooth, but this should be expected from such an absurd time as 32 minutes and 15 seconds. Despite this, however, we were able to find out the delay and increment values extremely quickly. This opens up the door to thousands of possibilities you can pursue now that you know how it all works. But before we end, I'm going to show you one more example, and it's one that I think you guys will find to be really cool. Let's calculate a time farm that makes the day last for 86,400 seconds. This is a really simple calculation, as once we input the value of 1, we immediately reach an integer value of 72. We can input this into our command block so that every 72 game ticks, the value of 1 is added to the time. Now, why is this cool? Because 86,400 seconds equates to exactly 24 hours. That's right, you can have a Minecraft day that lasts for exactly the same amount of time it would last in real life. On a server, you can even sync up your clocks so that if you're playing during the day, the sun is in the sky, and if you're playing at night, the moon and stars are out. Obviously, it wouldn't be the correct time of day for everyone in the world, since people would live in different time zones. However, it would be cool to know that you're playing at a certain time of day, maybe where the server is located, or the location of some kind of landmark, or some other such time zone that is decided when the time farm is set up. This is an extremely versatile system that can be used for countless durations of day lengths. If you do end up putting one of these into your worlds, tell me what you did with it on my social medias at Allies All Around. I am excited and would love to see what you all come up with. But anyway, I would promise that this video would go on forever, but that would be a lie. Subscribe to the channel to see more content like this, and until next time, this has been Frontline, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye.